Will the New York Mets swing any blockbuster trades this offseason? We'll discuss some options on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. Want to find any of my work? Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, if you look at this year's free agent class, as I discussed a bit on yesterday's show, it's thin. There's not a lot of talent available, whether that's the starting pitchers or impact bats. It's thin. It's top heavy. There's a couple of names that I discussed them on yesterday's show when it comes to the starting pitchers. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Aaron Nola, Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, Eduardo Rodriguez, Marcus Stroman. There's some arms out there, but there's going to be a lot of competition for those limited arms. And when you go to the bats, it's even thinner. So if the Mets are going to try to compete this year, and every indication from watching Steve Cohen own a baseball team for going on 4 years now, where every single season they've tried to be aggressive, and B, I don't think David Stearns is looking to come in here and be a loser in year one to just play it slow. He spoke about it in his introductory press conference when asked about when that competitive window begins. He said it should begin now. So assuming the Mets are making moves this offseason, it's going to be hard to build a team solely through free agency. I think a lot of what the Mets are going to have to count on, particularly on the position player front, is the growth of their young players, is expecting Francisco Alvarez to solidify the catcher position. It's hoping that a Brett Beatty or a Ronnie Mauricio can hold down third base. It's in Mark Vientos, I guess, factoring into that equation as well. Also, those guys looking at some DH opportunities. It's looking at the guys that were in AA this year, Luis Angel Acuna, Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, Jeremiah Jackson. So I think on the position player side, and we'll get to that a bit in the final segment, there is some room for optimism. And obviously, there's some room on the starting pitcher front as well. There's a lot of young pitchers the Mets have coming through their system, but they're going to need to add arms. And I'm not too concerned about the bullpen. David Stearns can build that up, through free agency if he has to. But particularly the starting rotation. The Mets need to add 2 starters this year. If they want to compete, they need to add 2 legitimate starters that can slot into their 1 through 3, ideally. It'd be Kodai Senga and the 2 guys you add. Now, if Jose Quintana's your 3 and you get a guy that's on the same level or a step below, who's your 4, and it's someone that you can really count on to give you quality MLB innings, okay, the Mets can get by. But getting 2 starting pitchers out of this free agent class is going to be tough. So what I wanted to do today is explore just some of the names that we'll be discussing throughout this offseason. It's almost a primer because we're going to have plenty of time to go through different trade scenarios where I can break down a deeper dive into what each of these guys have done throughout their careers, what they bring to the table, what future contracts could look like, what trade packages could look like to acquire them. But I want to just get some names on the board. So looking specifically at starting pitchers, the first guy that comes up, well, there's 3 that we're going to talk about right now in this first segment here. It's guys that will be free agents after next season. So theoretically, guys that could be on the move, all of them come from small market teams. The first one, Tyler Glasnow. Now, he has a fascinating contract that he signed in August of 2022. It's essentially, or was essentially, a 2-year, $30 million extension. Now, he was making a little over $5 million in 2022. He was due for a boost in his final year of arbitration, and they pretty much kept his salary stagnant. They gave him $5.35 million in 2023 as the first year of that deal. And now, year 2, he's making $25 million. Now, for luxury tax purposes, good news on the Mets front, he'd come in at about $15 million, a little bit over that, but still, that's good for a tax-paying team. For the Rays, though, to pay him $25 million in salary in this upcoming season, it's a little bit rough. So I do wonder if when they signed into that contract, it was, hey, we're guaranteeing you some money. We're guaranteeing the idea that you could be our ace at $25 million in 2024, or you reserve the ability to trade him. And if that's the case, he's an interesting guy because he's, uh, when right, one of the best pitchers in baseball, a guy who has stuff that's so good that you can dream on him being a Cy Young one day. That's how good he can be. But massive injury concern. Drafted or debuted, in 2016. He only has 2 years where he's eclipsed 100 innings pitched. Now, one of them came this past year, 120 innings and 21 starts, pitched to a 3.53 ERA. But there is some massive injury risk there. If the Mets really want to go for it next season, though, and it's a guy on a 1-year deal that you might be able to acquire, trading with the Rays, always a little bit dangerous, but hey, maybe that's a move the Mets could make. Another guy, Shane Bieber. He's in the final year of arbitration as well. I think he would have been moved at the deadline if he didn't get hurt this year, but he did. So now, up for grabs this offseason. They have plenty of young pitching in that organization. He pitched to a 3.80 ERA in 21 starts this year, 128 innings pitched. A guy that's been durable, but this year, as I mentioned, was hurt, had elbow inflammation. So how concerned are you about that? Velocity's been on a steady decline. It feels like those are two pitchers where if the Mets were closer, you'd go for it, but they're also of a similar ilk as the Chris Bassett trade a couple years ago, which I think is a good sort of example or a blueprint to follow if you're this Mets team. Get a guy, bring him in for a year. You could always sign to a contract after that. I don't think that it'd be the worst move to get either of those guys. And it would be a gamble, but gambles that could pay off massively because Bieber was a Cy Young. Glasnow could be one. Now, a guy that is a perennial candidate for Cy Youngs, who David Stern's really familiar with, is the third guy on this list, Corbin Burnes, who I'll do an entire episode on. I think I'm going to do that this week, aiming towards Thursday's show. So I don't want to spoil that episode too much, but he's been durable over the last 3 years. He pitched to a 3.39 ERA, over 193 and 2/3 innings pitched. This past season, Brandon Woodruff just went down. Could that make them even more likely, the Brewers, to trade Burnes and get some value for him? Because they might not be able to trade Woodruff now, since he's probably, I think it's a shoulder injury, but he's most likely out for all of next year. I think he has one more year after that. Burnes can be a free agent after this season. Actually, I'm trying to think. Maybe Woodruff might be right there with him. I think he actually might be. Regardless, it's an interesting option for sure, and one I think Stearns would be very interested in. Just not so sure how much the Brewers are going to be willing to make that trade. And again, that's going to be part of the full episode we're going to do on Corbin Burnes later this week. But those are the three guys who have 1 year left to control. If the New York Mets window to win a World Series, though, is more squarely in 2025 and 2026, which it might be considering some of the youth that you're hoping arises to the surface over the next calendar year or so, then maybe it's more important or a better route to trade for some arms with control. And that's what we're going to discuss next. First, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs are incredibly versatile shorts where they give you comfort, but they also give you good look and feel, particularly their stretch khaki shorts, which are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. And they're going to fit way better than regular shorts that are made of that stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed that issue by inventing a cloud knit fabric. Doesn't that sound nice? A cloud knit fabric. It feels like it sounds. Looks just like khaki, but stretches. So you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement, which I love on the golf course. In the past, you have to reach that etiquette to get on the course. You got to wear, your typical khaki shorts, and sometimes they're just not comfortable. Bird Dogs give you the comfort. Plus, they have anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long, especially when you're out in the course. If you want to try Bird Dogs, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or enter the promo code LockedOnMLB for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with every order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or promo code LockedOnMLB for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that. All right, so now let's look at some starting pitchers with control. And the first name on the list, the name that excites me the most, is Dylan Cease. Now, didn't have the best season. Pitched to a 4.58 ERA over 33 starts, 177 innings pitched, but he's a year removed from pitching to a 2.20 ERA with 227 strikeouts and 184 innings pitched back in 2022, was runner-up to Justin Verlander for the AL Cy Young, and you get 2 years of team control. Now, there was a lot of rumblings about Cease getting dealt at this past trade deadline, and no team ultimately met the high asking price that Rick Hahn set as the White Sox GM. Now there's a new GM, though, and the question is, what's the directive in Chicago? Is it still full rebuild? Is it still trade the pieces that you can that aren't going to fit your real World Series window? Is that how they're going to operate? And if they are, okay, what's the price tag for Cease and how much would the Mets be willing to give up to get him? That is probably a more in-depth conversation again for another podcast later this offseason. But if you just imagine what Cease could look like next to Kodai Senga in this Mets rotation, it would be a massive acquisition. I almost think that acquiring Cease would allow you to maybe, shop a tier below when it comes to the free agent market. Not to say you don't go after Yoshinobu Yamamoto or Blake Snell or Aaron Nola or Jordan Montgomery, but if those guys start to fall off the board, if you make the trade for Cease, well, you still got a co-ace with Senga, a top of your rotation, and a guy that's going to be there for at least 2 seasons, and then you could always extend him. So Dylan Cease has incredible stuff. I think he'd be an amazing fit, and that would be the guy that I'd be probably most all in on this offseason when it comes to prospect capital you'd have to give up. Now, if you're not willing to give it that much when it comes to prospects, and you're already on the phone with the White Sox, you can call about Michael Kopech. This is a buy low project. This is not a guy who you're trading for and are assured that he's even going to make 30 starts for you. He did pitch 129 in the third innings this year, which was good, but his ERA was 5.43. Has always had great stuff, but he walked over 6 batters per 9 this past year, had a whip, which is walks and hits over innings pitched, of 1.6. So that means every inning he was giving up more than a base runner and a half. Not really a great form of success if every 2 innings you're giving up 3 base runners, essentially. He has 2 years left to control as well, just like Cease. Does have intriguing stuff, and if Stearns has always had Kopech as a guy that he's wanted to target, and if you believe in your pitching lab, and maybe it's not going to cost that much to get him, could you get Michael Kopech for Mark Vientos, where the White Sox just say, hey, give us a bat with years of control. We're in on it. Fine. And you can get a pitcher that you can acquire for a prospect that no longer a prospect, but a player you might not have a long-term fit for, and you get a project. It's not necessarily a move that I'd be in love with, but I would get what they were trying to bet on, and I'd be interested to see how it worked out. Another guy that's a little bit along those lines, but certainly a much better pitcher over the last 2 years is Mitch Keller. All-star this past year, had a 3.31 ERA and 19 starts in the first half, but the reason why I put him in that sort of category of I don't know is because he pitched to a 5.59 ERA in the second half. Last 2 years, he has made 61 starts. His final season ERA has been 3.91 in 2022 and then 4.21 this past year. 2 years of control left. I just don't know if he's a frontline starter. I mean, he could be more of a 4. Now, he pitched like a 1 or a 2 for the beginning half of the season, but that fading down the stretch has me concerned for a guy that still has yet to completely put it together for a full year. He's definitely better than Kopech. I think I overstated that comparison, but he's not Dylan Cease. So, again, it just sort of depends on the package. But if you told me that the Mets got Yoshinobu Yamamoto and they have Kodai Senga and they couldn't find another starting pitcher in free agency and they made a trade for Mitch Keller, and so they're going into next year with Yamamoto, Senga, Keller, Quintana, and then all of the laundry list of guys they have from Peterson, McGill, Lucchesi, Budo, and then all the guys that were in Double-A who are making their way through the farm system to potentially get that 5th starter spot and to get starts when guys go down throughout the year. I think the Mets would be in position to have a successful season where they could sneak in as a wild card and maybe make some noise. So I would not be mad at that acquisition at all. A couple more. We got Patrick Sandoval. He's got 3 years left of team control. Was great in 2022, 2.91 ERA and 27 starts, nearly 150 innings pitched. This past year took a step back, 4.11 ERA, 144 and 2/3 innings pitched. Was better in the second half, 3.66 ERA and 12 starts. guy that looked great in the World Baseball Classic. It has his moments. I really like the stuff of Sandoval, where I'd be very happy, especially with the control that you'd have over him. And what you'd be betting on here, or why you'd be making the call, is maybe the Angels are going to lose Ohtani and bottom out. And if that's the case, scoop up a pitcher with a lot of control. Another guy that's similar when it comes to control is Brady Singer, but he's coming off an awful season. 5.52 ERA. He was dreadful in the World Baseball Classic and had that carry over into the season. Is a bounce back candidate, had a 3.23 ERA in 2022, 3 years of control. I feel like the Royals aren't going to sell this low on him, though. That they're going to, especially with that much control, they'll probably carry him into next season. Hope he pitches better to try to move him at the deadline. But that's just some of the names that might be available based on the upcoming free agent classes and teams that aren't necessarily contending. So it is even tough to find names in that trade market. I think the ones that intrigue me the most on the 1-year deals, I sort of like all of those guys, but Corbin Burns is obviously the most attractive. And on the guys that have some control, Dylan Cease is the one that I really like with the 2 years of control, and Patrick Sandoval as well with that 3rd year of control, a guy that I don't think would ever be your 1 or your 2, but could slot comfortably as your 3 or your 4 for a few years. So those are the main trades that I'd be interested in the Mets making this offseason to add a starting pitcher. We're going to talk bats next. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. October baseball is back. You can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Join FanDuel today to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Then you can get in on the action from the first pitch to the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. I said it on yesterday's show. Bryce Harper likes to hit home runs in playoff games. That was a prop that you could cash in on at FanDuel. You can bet on it again because guess what? He likes to hit home runs in playoff games. And if you don't want to wait the whole game to get a W, you can predict what will happen in the next at bat with quick bets. Head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner, Major League Baseball. Join the Locked On Mets Insiders where you can get breaking news, the inside scoop, and exclusive content delivered to your phone, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text. I'm excited to have you part of the Locked On Mets Insiders. You can find the link in the episode description, or you can go to subtext.com/lockedon. Today, the Locked On Mets Insiders got my power ranking for the top 15 free agents that fit the New York Mets this offseason. Today, I'm going to be sending out a special subtext about the trade package that it would take to get a Corbin Burns or a Dylan Cease. So if you want to find out my thoughts on that, again, find the link in the description or go to subtext.com/lockedonmets. Now, when it comes to trades for a bat, it's a lot harder to find targets because I don't necessarily know what positions the Mets need, because I think this is a team that really needs to find out what their identity is going to be moving forward. You know, Francisco Lindor and Brennan Nimmo are going to be there. Jeff McNeil as well. Pete Alonso, you hope so, but still undecided on that front. Outside of that, though, there's still a lot of questions. I think Francisco Alvarez, pretty much 95% solidified that catcher position. Has to do it in a year or two, but you feel pretty confident about that. Beyond him, though, there's a lot of questions. Who's going to be the third baseman? Who's going to be second base, left field, right field? There's a lot that has to be figured out. And there's a lot of young players that are going to be vying for those roles. I wanted to first, before we got into trade targets, look at long-term outlooks at each position. First base for now, we're just going to say Pete Alonso. That could change, but for now, we'll just keep it there. I don't think the Mets are going to do anything this offseason to replace Pete Alonso is the reason why we're going to keep that locked in. Second base, Jeff McNeil could be the guy, but you also have Ronnie Mauricio vying for some playing time at second. He finished the year getting a lion's share of the playing time at the position. And you have Luis Angel Acuna and Jet Williams at second base. So that's not a position the Mets have to trade for. Shortstop is Lindor. Third base, right now, Beatty, Mauricio are the two. Vientos fringe, it's just a big question about if he can play the position at the big league level. And then if Acuna and Williams aren't going to be your shortstop and one of them's at second base, maybe somebody's at third, still an option. I think that's a position the Mets could trade for, but it's also one that I'd be more than happy to see them roll the dice this season and see if any of these guys can stick, and particularly looking at Beatty and Mauricio. Left field. So Jeff McNeil long term, potentially. I also see Brandon Nimmo sliding into left at some point over that 8-year deal that he signs, going to year 2 of that. If not in left, he's going to be playing center, but behind him, you have Drew Gilbert and Jet Williams, 2 prospects that I think are maybe the best in this system right now. And both of them could be in center field at some point. So I don't think you have to trade for a center fielder or sign a center fielder like Cody Bellinger this offseason. Right field, it's currently Starling Marte. Jeff McNeil, maybe, but long term, I don't really see the answer. So if there are positions to trade for, it's probably right field and third base. But I don't know the players that really fit that spot that are expendable and on the market. I think the 2 names that come up the most where you'd be willing to part with significant prospects, it's the guys in San Diego. Manny Machado, if the Mets decided to go for a ridiculously expensive contract and ease that burden from the Padres, and who knows, there's been a lot of talk, not pinning it on Machado, but there has been some discussion with how the season went that there was some clubhouse issues out there. Fernando Tatis Jr. is really good. He proved he can be an elite right fielder. I don't think they're moving him. I don't think they can move Xander Bogaerts. So look at their big contracts, and if they want to keep Soto, how are you going to keep all those guys on the books? Maybe they have to move Machado. If that's the case, maybe the Mets swoop in and say, you know what, we're just going to get the guy that over the next 5 years, even though that contract could get scary at the end of it, you feel pretty good that Manny Machado is going to be a well above average player, both defensively and offensively, and you're going to buy into a window of Lindor and Machado at third base and shortstop. I could be talked into it, but I still don't see that as necessarily likely. And then there's the Juan Soto discussion, which we've already had on this show. That's sort of it when it comes to the bats. And that's ultimately where I lean towards the Mets playing this thing slow when it comes to the position players. It doesn't mean you don't add this offseason, but I think you add some veterans in free agency. If Mark Canha can shake loose from Milwaukee, it seems like they'd be wise to pick up that option. But if they don't, I think it's an $11.5 million option, which is a lot more expensive to them than it would have been to the Mets. I think that's a reunion possibility. Tommy Pham will be a free agent again. That's another future podcast that I'll be doing at some point this offseason. Which of those 2 guys would you like to have back? Michael Conforto going to hit free agency possibly if he takes the opt-out on his contract. Might be looking for a more full-time job, but if the Mets sort of promise him that, you never know. Have him slide back into either right field or left field, depending on the health of Marte. There's some options there where you can get an outfielder in free agency, I think. Not as much available when it comes to the infielders, but I think the Mets could make some subtle moves in free agency to add some veterans to compete with the young guys, and then just bet on youth when it comes to the position player front. I think in the grand scheme of things, with what's available in free agency this year and what's out there on the trade market, I don't know who the Luis Ariz of this trade market is. And I think that's something that teams are going to try to follow, like that model. Can you find the team that needs something that you have? For the Mets, I don't know who that player would be. Like, is there, okay, here's like a crazy fake trade. Like, is some team enamored by the stuff of David Peterson that they'd be willing to give up on a position? Maybe this is more of a Jake Berger trade, but an ill-fitting position player. Like, do the Cardinals love David Peterson so much that they would give up one of their outfielders? I don't know. It's tough to find that trade, though, and that's why I ultimately come back to a place where I think the Mets are best off planning to lean fully into the youth movement on offense. And if they fall flat with it, well, you're going to have a lot of problems moving forward anyway. But I think the hope would be one of Beatty or Mauricio is going to grab an infield spot. And if everything breaks right, both of them grab infield spots, and Jeff McNeil is squarely in the outfield. It's maybe Acuna and Gilbert can get up this year and they can contribute. Those type of things, even Jeremiah Jackson to a certain extent. I think they're going to have to add him to the 40, I believe. more of a utility guy. But again, these are just names that can filter through. And if enough of them break your way and you still have hopefully a better season from Jeff McNeil, even better seasons from Alonso, Nimmo, and Lindor are pretty solid this past year. But if your core performs, if Starling Marte can play to the contract a lot more than he did this year, like the Mets can still find their way to a suitable offense. And I think there's more internal solutions there than there are when it comes to the pitching, because even though I like a lot of those arms in AA, I really like Christian Scott. I think Mike Vassell in AAA, where he finished the season, I think he has a chance to do something for the Mets in the not too distant future. Blade Tidwell's a really intriguing prospect. There's a lot of different candidates there, but banking on any of them to make 30 starts for you this year is asking a lot. And that's where I think if the Mets are going to trade some of their prospect capital, it's best served going after a starting pitcher this offseason. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. On tomorrow's show, I want to discuss which Brewers David Stearns could target, whether current Brewers or former Brewers, as players he could acquire this offseason, which is going to lead into our Thursday conversation on Corbin Burnes. Make sure if you want to be part of our Locked On Mets Insiders, you find the link in the episode description or join at subtext.com/locked on Mets. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. And while the series didn't start off great for the Diamondbacks, we'll say it again to close the show. Go D-backs.